Hi everyone, it's so wonderful to see you all. Welcome to Inua Ellams in Conversation. It's the first of two events exploring representation of race in British theatre held here at the Uni of Reading. My name's, as you might know, Lucy Jeffrey, and with Matthew McFrederick we've organised a two-part series entitled Race and Performance Today. For our first event, we are thrilled to welcome the playwright Inua Ellams, author of Untitled, Black T-shirt Collection, An Evening with an Immigrant, and Barbershop Chronicles, which enjoyed a sellout run at the National Theatre in 2017. In fact, Inua is a multidisciplinary artist who also works as a poet, performer, and graphic artist. A key influence throughout his work is the African myth and folktale tradition, as found in work by other Nigerian writers, namely Chinua Achebe and Ben Okri. His big themes are masculinity, especially black masculinity, identity, belonging, and displacement from multiple perspectives, whether spiritual, religious, or from his own background. Our second event, which will take place on the 14th of March at 6 p.m. here in Bullnish Theatre, is with Natasha Gordon, whose play Nine Night is currently enjoying huge success at Trafalgar Studios in the West End, having had a sold-out run at the National. Like Inua, Natasha's work challenges white hegemonic power by centralising the black body and its attendant signifiers of blackness, hair, for instance, and focuses on themes of power and empowerment. So these events emerged out of the introduction of playwrights whose work prompts discussion of issues regarding gender, sexuality, class, and, of course, race onto our undergraduate modules, such as Introduction to Theatre. Students here at the Department of Film, Theatre and Television are also introduced to playwrights of various backgrounds in other modules, such as Performance and Identity and Performance and Nation. So we hope that these talks will extend and enliven these important debates and even invite fellow colleagues and students of other departments to join in with the discussion. The connection between racial representation and the arts is currently caught in a promising and precarious tension. To go back a little bit, in 1968, a few months after Tommy Smith and John Carlos clenched their fists and raised their arms in a Black Power salute at the Mexico Olympics, the Conservative MP Enoch Powell said, I quote, "The West Indian or Asian does not, by being born in England, become an Englishman. In law, he becomes a United Kingdom citizen by birth. In fact, he is a West Indian or an Asian still." 48 years later, our then newly elected Prime Minister, Theresa May, made the following comment during the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. I quote again, "The lesson of Britain is that we are a country built on the bonds of family, community, citizenship. But if you believe you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. You don't understand what the very word citizenship means." Whilst political responses highlighted the fascist overtones in May's rhetoric, in 2018, William Galinsky led an inquiry into how and why theatre is made and for whom, naming his 5 days of installations, performance and debate that took place in the National Theatre of Scotland, Citizen of Nowhere. It is this scrutiny of and artistic retaliation to attitudes towards race, immigration and belonging that is not only a rich source of creativity, but a necessary voice in an increasingly racially and politically divisive time. Indeed, much of the energy in British new writing is coming from black writers whose work investigates both established society and the variety of cultures within it. Despite our two events focusing on black British theatre, I do not want to suggest that there is one black theatre. As Felix Cross, the artistic director of Nitro, says in response to being asked, "What is black theatre?" I quote, "Is it when black actors get on the stage? Is it when a black writer writes a play? Is it when the company's owned by black people? Is it when it comes from a certain sensibility? Is there a style? Is there a different kind of language? Is there a different play structure? I don't know. What we hope to achieve in these two In Conversation events are debates that explore and question the extraordinary diversity and variety of social experiences and cultural identities that compose the category Black. As a politically and culturally constructed category which resists being pinned down by a fixed set of cultural norms, Black theatre offers us new ways of thinking about what it is to be a citizen in an increasingly fractured world. A world that seems intent on defining by difference and determining the ethnicity of its people depending on what side of a wall they may reside. On the back of such challenges, we celebrate the fact that with Nine Night, Natasha Gordon becomes the first female Black British living playwright to have a play on at the West End, and that the Black Theatre Archives project at the National Theatre in London is cataloguing information for every play written by a Black British playwright, signs perhaps that barriers or even walls can be taken down. So the format for the evening is quite simple. After I finish this brief introduction, Dr. Matt McFrederick will be joined by the playwright Inua Ellams to discuss his work in light of issues regarding diversity and inclusion on our national and regional stages. It is with thanks to the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative scheme led by Professor Simon Chandler-Wilde and Dr. Ellie Highwood that Matt and I have been able to arrange these two important evenings. We hope these In Conversation events will open your mind to new ways of thinking about diversity on stage and behind the scenes. And of course that you enjoy what follows. So just a brief aside, in the unlikely event of a fire, please exit through the main entrance and congregate outside the Palmer building, which is our fire assembly point. And after that, I hope not too anticlimactic finish, I would like you to join me in welcoming Matt McFrederick and Inua Ellams to the stage.
Let's just get ourselves set up here.
Yeah, you have to hold the button down.
That's what they told me.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a technical here.
Just. Good.
That sounds good. Hold the button down.
Yes, for a few seconds.
I think I've just turned it off, actually. Does that sound good?
Yeah. Good.
Is it recorded?
Is it recorded?
Let's hope so, yeah. Cool. Thank you very much indeed, Lucy, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone, and welcome, Inua.
Hi. Hello.
How are you this evening?
Good. I was just, I had this eye infection. Oh my god. Oh no, don't. I had this eye infection in this eye when I was in Ledbury. And it's now infected in this eye. So it might swell up by tomorrow morning. It's just itchy. That's how I am.
We're very lucky to have you this evening, as you can tell. We just had a cup of tea upstairs, quite a strong tea as well, I should say. And what was interesting was Inua was actually quite shocked that we've had Barbershop Chronicles on the curriculum here for the past 2 years. Are we the first university that you know of to?
And I bumped into someone who told me she'd written her dissertation on it, and someone else who was included it in the PhD she was writing. But I think you guys are the first. No one else has told me. If it is, then they haven't told me. But
okay,
yeah,
groundbreaking.
That's cool.
Cool. And linked to learning and linked to curriculums. For my first question, I was really wondering. Obviously, you grew up in Nigeria and you subsequently moved to London, to Dublin, and then back to London again. I was wondering, in terms of your learning and engagement in terms of study, what literature or spoken word were you engaging with across these countries?
Boy, I've always been a weird kid. My parents weren't quite sure where I came from.
Mine too.
Yeah. I sort of read everything I could get my hands on when I was a kid in Nigeria. I remember returning with an Argos catalogue when I was like 8 or 9, and I used it to construct an entire battle, like almost like
An Argos catalogue, did you say?
Yeah, because they had all the toys. As far as I'm concerned, each one was a squad, was like an army. So my sisters and I, we orchestrated a huge fight using, and that's when I realized there were problems with my imagination because they're just plastic figures, two-dimensional, but we created this huge thing that I felt like the god of war, you know. So I read Argos catalogs, is what I'm saying. But also, I was reading things like Great Expectations when I was 8 or 9 in Nigeria, in worlds that I didn't really understand, which is like the use of language and the characters.
Yeah.
So I read a lot when I was a kid. Then when I came here, when I was 12 years old, I pretty much read out my library in Victoria and in St. James. And then, yeah, I read everything that I could, things way bigger. I was reading like an introduction to philosophy when I was, I read a lot.
Is everyone else ashamed to know that they didn't do that as a kid? Yeah, I think I am.
Yeah.
And I noticed in one article, some of your influences in particular are Keats and Shakespeare, is that right?
Yeah, particularly about John Keats, because I like the tragic romance of him, and I had a fantastic poetry teacher in Dublin called Mr. Nolan, who was the basketball coach and the PE teacher at the time, but he was a fantastic literary mind, and he taught us the deep appreciation, not just of literature, but of articulation, and precise articulation. And he taught myself and my entire basketball team, who are close friends of mine, and we all went back and began to dissect the best of 90s hip-hop with the tools he taught us to dissect classic poetry, which meant that weird things began to happen in our heads. But he is now the school principal in Tala in Dublin, and he taught me a lot of things that I still write with.
Cool.
Yeah.
That sounds like the coolest class I've heard of in a long while.
Well, okay, this is one of my claims to fame. Aidan Turner was in my class. AKA the bare-chested brute Poldark. Yeah. When we were in class, I remember him in like 2002, 2001 in Dublin, saying he was going to be an actor, and everyone laughed at him, but I didn't. It was just this look of, I just knew it. And even now when I see him, the few times that I watch Poldark, I kind of see him laughing. Or when I saw him in Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, because he played the Hobbit. Yeah. I just saw him giggling the way he did when we were 15-year-old schoolboys. I'm like, you're not acting, you're this same kid. Yeah. So that's one of my crazy things. It was an awesome class. Yeah, and Aidan was one of the highlights for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
And with Aidan and with the Argos catalogue, it sounds like performance or theatre was very much at the forefront of
I used to
your early years or formative years.
Yeah, I used to act out like plays in church with my twin sister when we were about 10 or 9, but even earlier than that. My twin sister and I were very cute, so my parents used to rent us out as little bride and grooms to weddings. Yeah. So that's a kind of performance, right? Because I've married my twin sister about 5 times. Yeah, so everything from that to doing like plays in church, and to having a really great drama teacher in London, a guy called Mr. Summercorn in Holland Park. He was this rocker. He had like 7 earrings in one ear, purple beard, balding, and overweight guy, but passionate teacher. And it was the first time he ran little theater exercises, and there was this girl I had a crush on called Golmar. And nothing ever happened. Well, did it? Kind of.
How do you think about that?
How do you think about that? We were paired together, and she had to tell me a story, and the task was to then perform the story to the rest of the class. And she told me this story about when her parents got a divorce, and just them breaking the news to her. And she was crying, she was telling me the story, which meant that I could sort of console her, which is the closest she'd let me get to her.
There.
Yeah, there. But then I stood up and performed the story as best as I could, emulating her facial expressions and hand gestures to the class. And half of the class was sobbing at the end, including my teacher. And they stood up and gave me a standing ovation, the entire class. And then Gomer gave me a full hug, like a full body contact hug, which was really pleasing. And that's when I realized the power of storytelling, you know. And I think that was probably my first proper performance. And then I caught the bug, even though I just did it within the confines of school. And when I was in Dublin, I rewrote Romeo and Juliet. It was terrible. It was just, you know, just staggered with Irish slang, Dublin, South Dublin. And it was horrible. It was ridiculous. I casted the entire basketball team as the Montagues. And we never put it on. We had one rehearsal, then it was a disaster. Oh my God. But that's when, again, there was something brewing in me. And I wasn't afraid of Shakespeare. I didn't think of him as this, you know, this god of literature with whom all the words must be regarded and you couldn't do anything with it. I just thought, okay, that's what he was doing back then. This is how we might work in contemporary Dublin, and I'm going to put my spin on it.
So, how and where did you get introduced to professional theatre?
Well, that came about out of frustration. I started writing and performing poetry in 2003. And mostly in just small poetry cafes and venues, mostly around London. And in 2006, yes, I went to the Glastonbury Music Festival. I was invited to perform in this poetry tent. And it was one of those terrible Glastonburys where it starts raining 3 days before the festival happens. So you arrive and everything is flooded. I remember getting on a coach in Victoria Station, and there was this lady who was taking people from London to Glastonbury. And I asked her what the weather was looking like for the weekend, and she told me that storms were forecast. And I looked up, and it was cloud, you know, just not a cloud in the sky. So I laughed in her face, like a full belly laugh, like, you know, what kind of weather channel are you, you know? So we arrived in Glastonbury, and I remember pitching up my tent, going to sleep, and it was just a light rain. You know, some of the fields were soggy, but I thought this was the end of it. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a stream running through my tent, my entire bag was drenched. My shower gel had mixed with the water and slipped into my contact lens case. And I foolishly thought I could just blink the soap out. So I put it in and screamed for like 3 hours. And then I remember reading poetry in this tent, it was horrible. The flap of the tent was just doing that in the rain. It was full of like adults who were drunk or high, or drunk and high. And there was this 12-year-old girl running in and trying to sell them magic mushrooms. And there was a guy who had been writhing in the mud outside the toilets and kept on running in and attacking adults and pulling them out. And here I was trying to read them poetry. And I just thought, no, this is bad. So when I got back to London, I started to act or to read poetry in settings like this where I could control everything. The light, the sound, the smell, and that's how I slowly got drawn into theatre. And the first things I wrote were one-man shows which I performed, like The 14th Tale, Untitled, Black T-shirt collection. And then things just kind of grew. My big imagination began to take over, and the poems that I wrote were more complex and required more voices to realize their complete truth, and then became sort of theatre. But I still don't know what I'm doing. I still feel like I'm chanting. And by that I mean my approach to creating text for stage comes from my approach to creating poetry, which means that it comes from anything. It comes from random words clashing together in my head. It comes from images that don't fit, and I try to make them fit within a narrative, and stories sort of come forth.
On that note, in terms of your writing, what would be a standard day for you as a writer, or is there such a thing as a standard day?
Not really. And sometimes I fool myself. So whilst I was touring and writing other plays last year, I distracted myself by writing poems on my phone called Fuck Donald Trump. And then I changed it to Fuck 45. 45th president. And I read it at a couple of poetry events, and the audiences kind of liked the ways I was using language and setting up antagonists within my life. So it became this book that I'm currently about halfway through called Fuck 45. I'm making a list of things that I don't like, and I'm writing like fuck yous to them. And they're all really beautiful and delicate and almost crafted like jewels of poems. But I wrote that as a distraction of writing plays or writing television because I thought this isn't real work. But it totally is. Which is to say, my head is sort of zips around like a pinball machine most of the times, and I don't really have a structured day. I have various deadlines right now, so I try to wake up as early around 6 or 7 and write till 11 o'clock, then check my email and do admin between 11 and 12, and go back to writing for lunch, then keep on writing, then check my email between 4 and 5, and then try and finish up working. But what happens is I leave my house and I have my phone with me, so I'm working on another poem, or I'm listening to an audiobook, which is research for something else that I'm working on. So it never really stops like that.
Yeah. No. I'm sure quite a number of the audience would like to hear that poem that you referred to, or perhaps other poems. So perhaps now would be a good time.
Yeah, okay. I'll do so.
Here's some of your poems,
Yeah, I have. I'll read you some background. I know my dad follows me on Twitter and Instagram. So the first time I tweeted, I finished the fuck poem, I got a very angry voicemail. Like, what are you doing, Inua? Yeah. Okay. So let me start with fuck 45. Okay.
Is this the first time you've read this publicly?
No, I've read this once publicly. Yeah. I can read you some new fuck poems. So this is 4.5. Though you've held his nicknames like bullets in your throat, Adolf Hitler. Though you've loaded each chamber, Grabber the Hutt, cocked back your tongue, dubious Caesar, and let each shell blast with frustrated silence, Hermann Mao. Though you were ever gun ready, good to shoot from the lip, and the crew you roll with always come correct, Herr Hitler, Genghis Kant, Vanilla Ices, Toupee Fiasco, Clickwork Orange. Though you chorus these forthright as Baptist hymns, making community and communion of collective laughter, it is the night crossing the odd part of town, on the street, ravenous as morgues. A barefooted, dead-eyed white girl calls you nigger, as if a fact, as if her birthright. You learn the futility of laughter, its porous shield, that words can slip through, can still break you, its power affirmed, let loose in the wild, and this too Trump has done. That was a really pleasing poem. But this is called Fuck Nestle, and this kind of began the stream for me. It's about my twin sister, partially. Her name is Miriam. Miriam, laughing that she'd started lactating, become fountain of youth, a body, a breastfeeding factory for one, calls months later, and again, when in the closed cave of a son's mouth, a tooth poked through, glimmering white as wet starlight, wise men follow to Bethlehem. But what's a mouth if not a moist galaxy? What's milk if not primordial waters? What's a mother's chest if not Eden? And breastfeeding if not the passing of divine knowledge, the baby latching on, learning the body's soft frontier of flesh. The tongue's first and foremost purpose is this language. And then oftentimes their gaze will catch, and knowing between them is old and wise as the quiet hum of hills. Just think, the newly born deprived of this. Fuck Nestle forever. And this is because Nestle carried out this, some of you know, this thing where they taught women that breastfeeding was bad in order to sell them formula in developing countries. So it was just, yeah, it was really despicable. Should I read maybe one more? Yeah. Let me see. So this is called, no, not that one.
Not appropriate, yeah.
Not that one, no. Yes, okay. This is called Fuck Humanity. Fuck humanity, I want to bellow like a card-carrying champion of the nihilist society. Fuck all the ways even our most earnest, faithful, folded over, humbled, deep down considered attempts at amending our venomous ills undoes itself. Think almond milk and California wildfires, nitrogen fertilizers and industrial food waste, factory emission limits, and the booming trade in carbon offsets. Free market and exploitation, voluntary work and white savior complex, vegan avocado diet and deforestation, phones to connect our lonely spirit and black bodies in coltan mines. Fuck every single attempt. Our best bet is to annihilate our vicious selves. I want to bellow this as Ellie squeezes her 3-year-old hand into the calloused cave of mine. Her fingers, frail as elderberry petals, flutter. She calls me down to the careful constellation blooming in the concerned brown universe of her brimming eyes, and all I am folds over, humbled deep down, reconsider attempts at amending our venomous ills, even if it undoes me.
I'm just waiting for our Part 1 students now to reference these poems in their essays. So
Yes, please do.
something to look forward to.
Okay, right. Just in the context of masculinity specifically, maybe I should read this one.
Sure.
It's called Fuck Boys.
Oh, yeah.
It starts early. A man compliments the tight knot of his grandson's fist. Hit me, he says, holding open his palms. The boy strikes and winces. Shake it off. We are men, we feel nothing, the man says. The boy tucks a tiny fracture into the sleeve of himself and strikes again. The fracture burrows deeper. Over the years, others join. This when older boys squash butterflies. This when the teacher ridicules his painting. This when the fairy's light dims in the film. They swarm inward, a shoal of needles through meat, shredding the vicissitudes of himself. At 20, there are a nest of thorns around his heart. They flatten to a hard shell. They close and crush him in. At 30, he is imprisoned for a fight he can't justify. His heart is a gnarled knuckle now, but holds inside a spot of light, thin as spirit skin, in which the boy he was and the man he could have been whisper in hushed starlight in dim symphonies of other ways of being. Cool.
I'll come back to masculinities in a second, in a bit more detail when we talk about Barbershop Chronicles. But I wanted to say, first of all, you're obviously not a stranger to Reading because you've been here on one of your many tours. And both Lisa Bonarski and I saw you at the South Street Arts Centre when you performed An Evening with an Immigrant. And it's an extraordinary performance for anyone who doesn't know it. And it charts your journey from Nigeria to London to Dublin and then back to London again. And it really offers a sort of chilling but also forensic insight into the UK's immigration system. And I was wondering, for the benefit of everyone here, could you offer us a snapshot of your immigration process?
About what happened to me?
Yeah, your sort of journey.
My journey. My father probably started then. My father was a Muslim when he married my mother, and she was a Christian, and we lived in northern Nigeria at the time. And my father went to Mecca for the pilgrimage. And when he was there, he saw some things that didn't quite sit well with him, and came back to Nigeria unsure of his faith as a Muslim and if he could continue with his faith. So he just began questioning that and questioning Islam. And lots of the imams who lived in the local community weren't pleased with that. My father was a manager of a Coca-Cola bottling plant. He was quite wealthy. We were middle-class Nigerians at the time. And for someone of his stature to have stepped away from Islam would have been a bad thing, I think. So they did what they could to intimidate him into staying, being a Muslim, and none of it worked. So they made life difficult for him and for us. They attempted to take his life a few times when he came to visit us at school, in boarding school. So we fled the north, which was before Boko Haram became his force now. We fled the north and moved to the south, to Lagos, and lived there for a few years. But I think they tracked us down because a couple of really crazy things happened. A couple of my uncles vanished, and one of the security guards was killed. And I think they burned our neighbor's house down because they thought it was ours or something like that. And my uncle had to climb the roof and break the joint of the roof because it had left over. So we left Nigeria, and my father got a job working in collaboration with the BBC. And because he traveled so much, he knew a lot about telecommunications and worked managing such a company in Nigeria. So we came here and began to live here and applied for an extension to our visa. But all the paperwork, all our passports, all our birth certificates, everything just vanished in the post. And the Home Office refused to claim any responsibility, and the Royal Mail refused to do any of that as well. So with both of them refusing to claim haven't played any part in our sort of immigration confusion. They wanted us to go back to Nigeria, but we couldn't because they burned our house down in Lagos and it just. So our lawyers advised us to go to Dublin, that was part of the common travel area. So we went over there. Initially, we're just supposed to be there for a couple of months while they sorted things out because they knew we could return to Nigeria. But then they stopped communicating with my father. And because of that, we couldn't return to London. We are trying to live in Dublin, and we're going through the immigration system there. But then in the penultimate year there, my father began getting text messages from Sinn Féin, or at least they call themselves Sinn Féin, we don't know. And were threatening my father, telling us to get the hell out of Ireland. And they began following us going to school and going back home, and threatening to beat us up and threatening to rape my sisters. And my father just thought, we didn't escape Nigeria for this to happen.
Yeah.
So we left Dublin and came back to London and tried to figure out what had happened to our lawyers. And then we discovered that they had been raided and shut down by the Home Office for selling identities of their clients onto other people.
Mm-hmm.
So we started about trying to figure out what we could reclaim, and we start our immigration case, and that happened in 2005. And it was only settled in last year that we got indefinite leave to remain. So the whole thing process took about 23 years. And yeah, I think from the 7th of March specifically, I can now apply for a British passport. But I'm not sure what I'm applying to, given Brexit now. After chasing something for such a long time, I'm not sure what it is that I'm getting.
Yeah, I think in your show, An Evening of an Immigrant, you talk about the costs involved.
It's fantastically expensive. And what is even more despicable is how our current government has weaponized the word migrants and immigrants against the British public, not against immigrants. I mean, that's a psychological word for which we've suffered, and we continue to. Every time I get triggered when I hear migrants or immigrant, because I know it's always used 80% of the time in negative light. But the government has spooked all of Britain, and it's just been really it's just myths and legends and falsified information blown out of proportion. And that was one thing that I learned during that show, that lots of people just didn't know. And they digested all the lies, which everything from David Cameron, just spoon-fed across the country.
Yeah, I remember all the gas in the audience whenever you were telling all these facts.
Yeah.
But I was so glad to hear you won a Human Rights Award.
Yeah, from Liberty, which is a really powerful organization. They were campaigning for Britain to keep the Human Rights Policy, the Human Rights Act, as part of the judicial system here. And I always find it ridiculous that we're considering getting rid of it because we wrote it. And we're going to curate like a British human rights. And it just reads through the imperialism. Why would British human rights be different from human rights? It's like,
Yeah, we need to sort that out.
Yeah, we need to sort various things out. I wonder a lot about British, or specifically English identity, and wonder if some sort of a process of reclamation can begin to figure out what that is and to disentangle it from imperialism and colonization. Because during the 2012 Olympics, I'll never forget when all the athletes from across the planet are streaming into the Olympics, and what's his face? The ex-Daily Mail sort of editor who now heads up tomorrow, like the morning show.
Piers Morgan.
Yeah, Piers Morgan tweeted, "We should be an empire again," which is like we should go forth and colonize the world again. And for him, that was a sense of pride. And I think whenever we attempt to begin conversations about the legacy of colonization here, it comes with a lot of guilt because we haven't figured out how to articulate it yet to ourselves. And it comes specifically with a lot of English guilt because the Welsh and the Scottish tried to fight against those things. They're still, their identity is sort of separate. And I think trying to figure out what it means to be English and divorce that with what it means to have been an empire, to be in this imperial force, might be something to raise the sort of, can make the country healthy enough to begin to look at their colonial history without being ashamed of it. Because if that's all we're claiming as the bedrock of identity, then it's problematic because we want to teach, our own evil. But if we have something else to focus on, this still makes it English, then that can't be our only thing, And I say that as ours because I've lived here since I was a kid, and I think the fate of this country is tied with mine, wherever that fate is going. And I say that with a lot of fright because I'm not sure where we're going, but I'm tied into the sort of the spiritual health of this entire country, and I want the best for it. I'm not sure if I'll survive the process, but I still want that work to happen. I want to contribute to it.
Yeah, they're really big questions, and I really hope you get your passport before the end of March. I don't know what the situation will be.
Yeah, my little sister actually tweeted the whole family group saying she no clue what's going to. If they change all the rules, they might change all the rules. If they repeal the Human Rights Act, which is the set of laws under which we're granted indefinite leave to remain, they may just unravel everything. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen. Yeah, it's a little nerve-wracking at the moment.
And back to An Evening with an Immigrant, that was one of, I suppose, numerous collaborations you had with Fuel Theatre.
Yeah.
And very much at the forefront of that company is the artistic director, Kate McGrath.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that she's a real champion of your work? And would you like to say what sort of impact?
Yeah, Kate is awesome. Kate, I remember her emailing a few theatres across the country, regional ones, saying, would you like to host some of Inua's work? Like, for instance, An Evening with an Immigrant. And they'd say, I'm sorry, we don't have the audience for that, because they thought the audience meant black people. And Kate would be like, well, would you like to have the audience for that? Let's begin the conversation. What is the story about? How can we market it? If you take Inua's face and color the skin away, what is the theater? What is dramatic here? And so she really begins that conversation and really works and champions myself. And she has for as long as I've known her. She's just been fearless. And that's to do with her father, John McGrath, who was a playwright from Scotland, who also was fearless, intensely socialist, intensely political, intensely Scottish. I think that's very accurate. And a lot of his blood, a lot of his passion kind of seeped into his daughter, even though she tried to rebel and went to Oxford and stuff like that. Each time when she left and kind of figuring out what to do, she just ended up in this world and realized that she'd been training to do it all her life. And she's completely fantastic. I think they're a little bit overwhelmed with Inua Ellams' projects right now because it's a little nuts and I need to stop creating so much work.
Yeah, they're taking over.
Yeah.
I know we're going to move on to Barbershop Chronicles now, which Fuel Theatre Company co-produced. It sold out twice at the National Theatre, just to correctly see from earlier. It also has been on a US tour, an Australia and New Zealand tour, and it's currently going to go on a national tour of the UK and have a 6-week run at the Roundhouse Theatre. on that note, part of the reason that we added it to the curriculum was that Lisa and I went to see this show in London, and we were just blown away by the sense of joy, but also the powerful underlying messages within the play. And I was wondering if you could just give us a sense of the genesis of the play as well, from your point of view.
It came from poverty, really. That's where it came from. When we first came here, came to England, money was so tight that my father and I could no longer afford to go to barbershops. So I would cut my father's hair, and he'd cut mine. And I slowly forgot that barbershops existed. I forgot about the social spaces that they were. They just kind of drifted out of my head. And then I went to Dublin, and I'd follow my white Irish friends to get their haircuts. And I'd see their barbers just look at me in fright, like nervous of me asking them to cut my hair, because they didn't know what the hell to do with it. So I just learned not to ask, but to carry on cutting my father's hair, and he cutting mine. And then when I came back to London, I was dating someone who worked in public health, mental health specifically, and she gave me this flyer that she found where there was a non-governmental organization called the NHS, when that, woke back then, and they were trying to run projects where they teach barbers about counseling, how to spot mental health issues within the barbershop in the clients are able to offer remedies or solutions right there on the spot, not to refer them to clinic, because they knew the stigma attached to mental health problems in African and Black communities, so just to fix it right there and then. And I was just bowled over by that, and I wanted to sit down and listen to the conversations and write poems about them or create visual art about the clients and the barbers. But I couldn't get anyone to fund the project. I was speaking with the South London Gallery in Camberwell. I was trying to get them to find some money to make it happen, but it didn't. But the idea just stayed with me. And after Black Teacher Collection did really well at the National Theatre, they sort of invited me, like, what else are you working on? So I said, I don't know, I think I could just write a play about barbershops. And I said, okay, here's some money to spend the time exploring the idea. So for 1 month, I went to barbershops across South London. I'd go there, listen to conversations, transcribe them, and I came back with some text. And Kate sort of directed a reading of it. And we had this the guy who ran the new writing department called Sebastian Bourne just really liked it. He was cackling. He said, I've never heard anything like this before. This could be a good idea. So develop it as a play. But in typical Nigerian fashion, I wanted to go bigger. So I asked for some money, and Kate got a couple of people to fund me to go on this research trip across the African continent on my own. So I gathered my dictaphone and my backpack. I just went traveling across the continent for 6 weeks, spending a week in each country, and returned with 60 hours worth of audio, which I distilled and edited into this text. And even then, I had to come up with 50% of the play. Like, I invented new characters, merged characters together, came up with conversations, etc. And the draft finished running at something like 4 hours long. And I gave it to Sebastian, put that shit on stage. And I was like, okay, you know what? I respect you, just about. This is really, really interesting work. I knew nothing about any of these countries. But this play lacks dramatic momentum. And so, what is dramatic momentum? And slowly he began to teach me just the bare basics of theater, which is to say I know a lot, but I didn't know how to create something so disparate and funnel it. And suddenly, after like the 7th draft or something like that, we realized we could set it all in one day. And that's when the story really began to take shape, and I realized I could use a lot of repetition and things that I refined from writing poetry for so many years into creating a sort of internal logic and structure and disparate diasporic community, just to unite them. And that's where the play sort of came from. Yeah.
So, is it somewhat verbatim?
Yeah, it's about 50-60% verbatim, yeah. And some of the characters are who I met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I must have met some big characters.
Oh, yeah.
Across the
And some of them asked me to leave their names in the play, Like Shoni Sani, that is Shoni, and he used to work for the British Council. He took me to his barber. Fabrice there is the name of his barber. Simpiwe, that is Simpiwe. I met him in an airport somewhere, I can't remember where now. Mohammed, that is Mohammed's name. Wallace is my driver. Whenever I go to Lagos, he was telling me about just getting his job as a taxi driver, so that is Wallace's name. He knows his unique play. He gets excited every time I tell him someone is performing you in this part of the world. I communicate to a bunch of them via WhatsApp still, so a lot of those characters are real, live, breathing men. You know, if ever there's a part 2 to Barbershop, I'm just going to hang out with them at that point. Like, what's new right now? Yeah.
But it's pretty clear in the play that there's lots of similarities between the barbers, but there are also lots of distinctions as well.
Yeah, just look, there's a lot of nuance in barbershop culture. And I'm very soon going to start adapting it as a television series. And I'm going to ask for money just to go back there and film the various, and like, I remember when I was in Kenya, part of the treatment is they give you a full facial massage in the barbershop. Someone really rubs this white, creamy thing into your skin and gets rid of your dead skin, and they give you a facial massage and put a hot towel all over you and stuff like that. And it's really, and that's just standard. Whereas here in London, we just give you a haircut and kick you out. You know, I think that's good, but there is just so, barbershop culture is so precise and so fantastic. Yeah.
Awesome. And in terms of the production itself, as I said, it was just full of life, and I think Paul Taylor in The Independent summed it up nicely, and he said it was life-affirming as such. Can I ask you, how integral were the director, Bijan Shabani, and the designer, Ray Smith, in the production?
Yeah.
And
well,
did they allow you into the rehearsal room?
Yeah. I was in the rehearsal room as often as I could, and they really welcomed me there because I knew all of those countries, so I could really inform everything from how the actors would say. And I'd say, no, Ugandans speak about a third as fast as that, so we have to slow down the speech. And I'd say, no, it needs to be fast. So I was really involved in it. But one thing about it is that I'm really terrible at names. Like, I'm horrible at names. And I didn't know Bijan Shabani's name. I just didn't know. But I knew 3 of his plays. But when I say new, I mean, like, he created The Brother Size, which is a fantastic play. He created Our Class, which is on the National Theatre, and another play called The Kitchen. And all of them had really incredible movements. And just created drama and space out of nothing, just people standing. And I really liked the lightness of the communication. And I remember when I was writing Barbershop Chronicles, I asked myself, how are we going to get from like a tiny barbershop in Soweto to big London? There were like 3 times as many seats. And I'd say to myself, okay, I saw it in Our Class, it's fine, just keep writing. So when he came, the initial director, who I shall name, pulled out of the play because they didn't think he could do it justice. And Kate sat down and she was trying to suggest other directors, and she was just throwing directors' names at me. And I didn't know any of them. Like, oh, no, sorry. So she switched tactics and began to read titles of plays. And she read Our Class, The Kitchen, and Brother Size. And I said, yes, I was writing the plays with all of those. And she said, brilliant. Those are all directed by the same person.
Oh, so she was steering you down the...
No, she was just reading plays at me. Okay. But she didn't know that I've been writing them to Bijan's very aesthetics. Yeah. So when he came to Bijan directing the play, it worked perfectly because I'd been writing it for him, not knowing who he was. You know, so when we were in the rehearsal room and I was talking about movement, I was like, yes, that's what I want to have. I've been thinking about that for the last 3 years. So it just happened beautifully. And regarding the set design, I really love Ray. And when I was traveling across the continent, I was taking lots of photographs. I had this, I don't know, 60 gigabyte Dropbox full of pictures. And I said, here's my research. So she downloaded and sifted through and brought things back and spoke in conversation about ways of creating a visual metaphor for connections. And she saw these telephone poles, these telephone lights and everything. And just, so I collaborated as much as I could in all aspects of it.
Did you always see it staged in the round, or was it the case that that was a gradual progress? Because for those of you who don't know, it was staged in the Dorfman Theatre in the round.
I think it seemed like the most fluid way to communicate the world of it. And yeah, Untitled, I performed that in the round. And that's one of the things you're not supposed to do, is that I'm going to do a one-man show in the round because you have your back to at least a half of the audience. But I did that and I was spinning around. I think I was busy, so I'm trying to give around my face, like giving them loops. But when he came to the National Theatre and explained that, Bijan said, well, we have 12 actors on stage, so we can act through 6 other people at any one time and any work. So yeah.
And of course, I can't forget the ensemble as well. They're such a huge part of the production.
Yeah.
Did that come really naturally in terms of the cast connecting with each other, or was that something that developed over the course of rehearsals?
It happened relatively quickly.
Yeah.
And Vision was fun because once we had these black men in the room who all went to barbershops, they realized that all we needed to do to create the barbershop setting was a chair and dudes talking. And once we realized we could really just conjure the world from that, it made our world easy. It made the work easy because the stories were incredible, they were funny, the actors were telling things about things that happened in their barbershops, we suggested lines which are incorporated into the script, so we're changing things and tweaking things. And sometimes they'd improvise things and set that in stone. So it was very, very fluid. And that's the way I began introduced into theater. My first little director was a guy called, oh God, come, no. Oh no! Thierry Lawson.
Wow.
And Thierry was so welcoming and so open a director when people were walking past the rehearsal room. He'd be like, excuse me, please, and invite them in and sit down. I said, okay, Inua, go. So I have to perform the scene and say, what do you think? And I remember we built a set out of a bench because there happened to be a bench in the rehearsal room and it was the right. So it was just so alive and welcoming and open. And that is how I like to work with theater. So we never said, you are the actor, we are the creative team, never shall we train. Just do what we say. It was always what you think. How should you think? And so that's what made the cast work so well. The sense of brotherhood was actual because we discovered it. We all had each other's back in the rehearsal room, and we just emanated that joy out towards the audience of the National Theatre. We created something there which baffles me to this day. There was a kindling, there was an electricity among us. And I've met all the actors since that have done all different jobs in television, and they keep saying that over those months at National, there was some confluence in the room.
Yeah, it's so clear in performance. And for anyone who hasn't seen the production, definitely do try and see it if you can. Just to return to masculinities then, obviously this features throughout the play, and some of the themes that are linked to it are related to football. We have the Chelsea versus Bayern Munich match being a thread throughout the play. We also have fathers and sons appearing. We also have politics being a thread. But there's one particular scene towards the end when Emmanuel and Ethan are having a conversation. Ethan is trying to be an actor, and he's told that he has to be a strong black man. Correct me if I...
Yeah, that's correct.
That's the correct line. Was it always your intention to bring these issues to the surface and to challenge the representation of African men on stage?
No. I didn't know what I was looking for when I set out to research. I just went on my dictaphone and just spoke with men. That's it. So what they talked about was what is in the play, because I find echoes of the same conversations in other parts of the continent and here in the UK. So my rule was this: if the same topic came up in three different parts of the world, they'd make it into the play. And that was it. So all the themes that existed is because they came up, they just kept them coming at different facets in different ways. And the play emerged as such. I didn't have an agenda going at all. I just discovered and learned to edit and fine tune and to enrich and to deepen things. So no, I had no agendas going forth. I just wrote what I found.
Okay, and just linked to the idea of race, how would you describe your experience of British theatre's relationship to race from what you've experienced as a writer, performer?
I think in subsequent years I've begun to realize just how lucky I was. And by lucky I mean, I sort of had cake, just believe in my work. And I never learned about the politics, about race or representation. And I never knew that I wasn't seeing myself on stage because when I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't born a black man. I was just born a man. When I read The Famous Five and The Secret Seven. I wasn't thinking I was reading stories about white boys traipsing through farms and trying to, eat butter biscuits and shit. I just thought, these are kids going on an adventure. I want to be on those adventures with them. And then they were faceless to me. They were just kids. So when I came here and I was watching everything from just things on television, one of my favorite sitcoms in Nigeria was on Frank Spencer. Some others do have them. And I never thought that's a white man who's just been seen. I just thought that's a pathetic human being. And I sympathize and empathize with him. Which is to say that when I was going to theater, I didn't think I was seeing myself. I just thought these are the stories here. And when I began performing in theaters, Kate was doing such a good job of cloaking it in the politics. All of these that arrived and I'd perform my shows and people were there and they'd be crying at the end and buying my tickets and buying me food and taking me out to drink. So I wasn't aware of the lack of representation until I began hearing conversations where people were telling me this has never been done before. What has never been done before? What you're doing right now is the first, all of these things. And I began to realize the space that I occupied in theater, which frightens me a little bit and still does. I keep on thinking of the Spider-Man saying with great power comes great responsibility. And I realized that I'm in this really position of power, which I write poetry for a living because it's just me, and I create the rules and bend them, and there's nothing, there's no power structures except ones that I invent for myself, and I walk. So being in all of this is just really where I'm working, and I never planned any of this. All I planned to do was, all my father planned was just to survive, and us kids. And I started writing because it was illegal for me to get a job doing anything else. And so it all came out of necessity and frustration, and I was funneled into it. So now that I'm this, they keep on putting out this pathetic list of the 100 most influential people in theater, and I've been on it for the last 2 or 3 years running, and I have no clue what that means or what I'm supposed to do in that position, because I keep just trying to write things that I'm interested in. I never think about the racial politics and repercussions of it. I'm writing an adaptation of Chekhov's Three Sisters, and the only reason why I felt I could do it is because I have 3 sisters. Like the dynamic of the family is the dynamic of mine. And there's the other brother is called Andre, I think, and it's this sort of waste man, this Russian guy who he just fasts around, he has no real directive. And that's totally me. So I'm like, okay, I can write 3 sisters, I'm gonna put my sisters in a play. But suddenly, it's this big thing because the National is doing it again more Chekhov, but suddenly, because I'm doing it and it's about the Nigerian Civil War and there's lots of politics and British involvement in the conception of Nigeria, and therefore the legacy of colonization and imperialism again, suddenly is a big thing. But that was the last thing that when I was just like, I'm just going to write about my sisters, and it's not going to feel like real work because I'm going to have to do research. I'm just going to put them, So this is what I'm talking about, power and responsibility. Like, I don't want any of it, but I'm in it, and it scares me most of the time.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I feel like I've asked you loads of questions, and I should give this opportunity then to everyone in the audience if they have any questions to ask them. Yes, Xavier, at the back.
You were talking towards the start of the conversation about identity and national identity. And I don't know if you kept a close look on the Trevor Noah incident that happened a while back.
Okay.
He was talking about nationality for the World Cup, with calling the French national team African national team, and it started a whole thing. And I was wondering if you agreed with the way that England as a country views nationality, where it's people's origins over being English, or whether you think it'd be better to look at it rather they're English before their origins.
What I intensely feel is that human beings are naturally nomadic. On my father's side, my ancestors were cattle herders and goat herdsmen, just roamed around North Africa. And I traveled a lot because I think those winds are still in my sails. I just always want to go. And I think attempts to create borders and to pin down the human spirit creates problems. I think it's definitely done so in England, especially because England colonized 88% of the world. We've invaded that many. And I think it inhibits the human spirit. That's what I fundamentally believe. I think worthwhile work should be done in which we discover other ways of creating communities that aren't tied geographically. Because I only see fractures in our future as a species, as a race. So, yeah, I think there are problems. I think we need to figure out something else because this isn't working. When climate change really sets in, half of Europe want to go to half of Africa. And there are going to be problems if we think you can't come here because you're not from here and half of the planet will die out. I don't want that to happen. But if we take these ways of deciding nationalities, if we stick to them, then there will be genocides across Earth when climate change takes root. So we need to fix something to save ourselves. That much is clear. I don't know what we do. I don't know how we need far more intelligent people to figure that out. But that work needs to be done. Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that indeed.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Lynn, yes.
Well, I just wanted to ask a question about the National Theatre, really. Obviously, you've done work across small-scale theatres across the country, and Benton and Reading has benefited from that. But recently, some of your work has been on the National Theatre, and you're going to do some work in the National Theatre in future.
Yeah.
And I just wondered what your feelings were about the National Theatre's position in relation to particular communities in this country, and whether putting your work on, I mean, obviously, putting your work on there is very worthwhile for you, but whether that's how that kind of is welcoming, how the National Theatre is welcoming for diverse communities, and whether that's whether it's kind of beneficial for you to be at an institution like the National Theatre, which carries such weight with it.
Again, it started off with me just reading long poems on the National Theatre stage. And writers of color, poets specifically, began to realize they could present work in different formats and raise the potential and the idea of longevity within the poetry ecosystem, which just kind of broadened its horizon a little bit. So as a poet, as someone invested in the poetry community, it did wonders, not just for my work, but also for the next generation of writers coming up. Think, oh my God, this is something we can think about in the future. And I've watched National Theatre change regimes twice, from Nicholas Heitner, who was fantastic and commissioned and put on my work, to Rufus Norris, who's also really, really great and fantastic and open-minded and broad thinking. And he really spent the first few months of leading that organization thinking about the word national in National Theatre. What does it mean? How can we best reflect that? And some of the projects that are going to be coming to light you really see that trickle throughout the entire building. He's created something called Public Acts, which is where he invites members of the entire country to take part in a single performance. They did something called Pericles last year, which had a cast of something like 300, and they had schools and various communities telling the story about this migrant prince. And he head-on tackled immigration. He did that in the face of all this anti-immigrant xenophobia raging across the country, and he made a statement, made a commitment, and he put his money where his mouth is. And I think as long as we have leaders of organizations like that willing to stick out on a limb and do what is morally and ethically right, I think we're in safe spaces. And I'm always happy to add my name to those things, because I try as much as possible to create work that addresses those things. Secondarily, when I've decided this is what I'm going to do, I figure out how can I make comments that we're all having, conversations we're all having. So I'm happy to put my name there. But I'm also quite willing to take my name back if I see something that is against my spirit. A couple of times, Kate and I have had frank conversations about organizations and things that have been said, and I just pull back. Yeah.
And of course, your next piece that will be out will be in the Kiln Theatre, which is a very different dynamic to the National Theatre. So, could you tell us something about that production?
Yes. I'm laughing because of how Nigerian I am. And by that I mean I managed to get paid 5 times almost for the same piece of work. Well, 83 and a half. Well, this is what I mean. I wrote this poem called Of All the Boys in Plateau Private School. And in it, I describe a bunch of like weirdos that I hung around with when I was in school in Nigeria. There's a guy called Kika who could spit very high and catch his own saliva in his mouth. Kind of gross. But I called him the half-god of rainfall in this poem. And my poetry tutor, a guy called Buddy Lumsden, told me he liked the line, he liked the image. This was back in 2011. I thought, oh, okay, cool. And I began to question myself, what does the half-god of rainfall look like? What would the half-god of rainfall be like? And because I played basketball, I thought, okay, maybe it's a guy who just makes it rain, rainfall. It's a basketball player, incredible three-point shot. And I began to write this story about a guy who was a half-god of rainfall. I mean, in order to be a half-god, his father needed, or mother needed to be a god. And I chose to sort of have Zeus as his father, and he's a demigod, and he plays basketball, and this epic story just kind of came out of nowhere. And I've written, and I think initially I had a conversation with the Tricycle Theatre, they recalled that then, and they asked me, we'd like to commission some of your work. And I said, I have this story about this basketball player who's the son of Zeus. I said, okay, brilliant, like that. So when they gave me the commission, they just went to the story. However, I didn't tell them the shape of the story. So I ended up writing an epic poem. It's like 3 syllables, three lines long, and each line is 12 syllables, so 12 syllables long. So three lines in each verse, and each line is 12 syllables long, and has this interlinking rhyme scheme the whole way through, where the second line of the preceding verse rhymes with the first and third of the subsequent verse. You can kind of see that in your mind's eye. Yeah. And I wrote this epic story which starts at a tiny grass basketball court in Nigeria, where this guy who's half the son of Zeus, half Nigerian mortal, plays basketball, and then he comes to the finals of the NBA championships in the Oracle Center in California. Then he comes to the 2012 Olympics here in England, and there's this set piece in it. And then he goes to the very furthest reaches of the entire solar system, and ends with the complete destruction of Mount Olympus in Greece. So it's this huge, epic, Homeric story. But when I first finished the draft, I tried to get a poetry publisher to publish it as verse. And they said, oh, we don't know what to do with this. And then Oberon, who published my theater, said, okay, great, we'll publish it. But I always felt like the story could be bigger. So I finally sold it to HarperCollins. And they're going to publish it as a book in April, and they also offered me an advance, which was twice as lucrative as the play commission. So I've been paid 3 times for the same text, and I'm just patting my Nigerian head for that, because it's happened. But anyway, that's besides the point. Besides the capitalist in me, it's really about contemporary attitudes to religion. It's about ways in which we celebrate sports figures, we make heroes of them, and how we let them get away with murder, literally. And it's also about contemporary masculinity. And it's about all of these things, but primarily it's about a boy's relationship with his mother and the women and the goddesses in his life. And a bunch of the Greek gods are characters in this. A bunch of the Yoruba gods are characters in it, and it's a clash between Greek mythology and Yoruba mythology set in the world of basketball. And the visual world kind of feels a little bit like Space Jam meets Black Panther / Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief.
Is that how you're advertising it?
Yes. That's
it's so bad. Yeah, 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And it takes place in the Kiln Theatre.
Yes.
When does it open?
It opens in Birmingham for about 5 performances on the 14th of April, I think, and then it runs in Kiln for about a month or so. And it's one of the biggest, I want to say one of the biggest things I've written, but I write really big things. But this is huge, the scale of it, the world of it, the repercussions of the actions, and how the story ends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't spoil it on us. Yeah.
Yes, just pre-order the books. You can get it from Amazon right now. Yeah.
Do we have any final questions? Yes?
Being so multifaceted and having so many different avenues that you create in, how do you choose which one and in which medium to push with your next project? Not specifically your next project, but in general.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like it's a real problem. It's a real problem. Yeah, I don't know. I think I try and pair up with artists and with organizations and see what room there is for me to move in on their stages, on their spaces, and then try and create work accordingly. But it's really wild now. The fuck poems, I'm not sure if I want them to come out as a book. I've been thinking of going into my graphic background and creating them as visual art and selling them as 45 posters and trying to strike up a deal with, I don't know, Paper Taste or something like that. Or to work with an art gallery in London and try and figure out something. So I have no clue. I spent much of last year writing the script for a film which is going to be displayed in virtual reality headsets. And I've never directed a film before, and you know, traditional film is like directed like that. There's a rectangle here, but in 360, you're directing for the entire world around you. So I've never directed now to direct the world, and I wrote the script, but the script is a sequence of sonnets, a crown of sonnets entirely, and there are 14 sonnets performed by 14 different characters, and it works the way a relay does, where one person reads the poem to the other, and the person reads the poem. But what the film is about, when I finally make it, is about how an organic financial community, unregulated as they are in Lagos, supports themselves when there is no proper taxation. And all I wanted to do was, just for another level of complication, is that the sonnet has 14 lines in it, and the film is going to be called The 419, and 4 plus 1 plus 9 equals 14, but it's also the name given to Nigerian conmen. They're called the 419 men. So the film is going to be called The 419. It's a series of 14 sonnets, which together go from the lowest members of the financial community, a local drug dealer who sleeps rough in a car park, right up to a member of parliament, and goes across all echelons of the community there. So that initially, I wanted that to be a few sonnets. Now it's going to become a film, and a film in 360, but we're going to tour it as an installation surrounded by photographs taken on location in VR headsets with the book as well. So, and I'm going to design the book as well. So it's going to be a little bit of everything. So I think I don't try and present work in one form necessarily. I try to do it in different things, which is what the half-quarter range was going to be, this book, but also this play, and maybe a Space Jam meets that kind of a film, something. But I also think we make a really fantastic video game. So that might be nice.
Your projects are just epic in nature.
Yeah.
You've been so generous with your time this evening, and we've all loved listening to you. I was wondering, would you finish with a poem for us, perhaps?
Yeah. Do you guys want to hear? I don't want to, okay. Want to be what should I read? Another fuck. Ooh, yes. This is a new one. This is called Fuck Tommy Robinson. You guys know who Tommy Robinson is, right? Okay, just checking. But it's really about maggots. This is it. Fuck Tommy Robinson. Because theirs is a progressive work, You, Tony Robinson, are less even than their slimy spirits. Indeed, you are what the slimy spirits of maggots are spooked with. Before birth, maggot spirit mothers tuck into rotten food and decomposing flesh, spirits of your unborn young. Warning, if you consider bad deeds, you'll be born without the enzymes we use to melt food. All the while chomping through decaying flesh, feasting on wounded brethren, they chant, I'm not Tommy Robinson. I'm not Tommy Robinson, like field slave work songs, lifting them through the celestial murky work to pupil stage, to eventual resurrection where the spirits evolve upwards, unfurling into flies, their thorax emerald chrome, their eyes burnished burgundy, their wings see-through blue and touched with lightning. That's it.
Thank you very much, Inua, and thank you very much, everyone, for coming out. Just a reminder that the Natasha Gordon event will take place on the 14th of March at 6 p.m. in this very theatre. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Thanks, guys.